It was a gray morning in 1959 when a small Connecticut town awoke to a silence that felt different. The kind of silence that carries a weight you can't quite name. Neighbors went about their routines, unaware that just a few streets away, a discovery was about to be made that would echo through generations. A story whispered behind closed doors, and one that would come to be known by a haunting phrase: "He broke my doll." Catherine Denino was only 10 years old, bright, curious, and known for her love of dolls and daydreams. She lived in a quiet, working-class neighborhood where children rode, bicycles passed white picket fences, and parents trusted that safety was simply a part of life. But that illusion shattered one cold November evening when Catherine didn't return home from playing outside. What began as a frantic search by her parents soon spiraled into one of the most chilling true crime stories in Connecticut's history, one that still raises uncomfortable questions more than 6 decades later. When police finally found her, it wasn't in the way anyone had hoped. Her doll lay shattered beside her, its porcelain face cracked, its arms torn from the body. And on the wall, someone had scrawled the words that would forever define this case: "He broke my doll." But who was he? Was it a stranger who drifted into town unnoticed, or someone far closer, someone who knew Catherine's routines, her habits, her trust? As detectives began piecing together the fragments of her final day, what they found went far beyond a child's disappearance. It revealed a side of human nature few wanted to admit existed. And so, we begin this chilling journey, one that forces us to ask, what really happened to Catherine Denino? To understand the tragedy, we must first understand who Catherine Denino was, and what made her disappearance so deeply personal. Catherine wasn't the kind of child who sought attention. She was quiet, polite, the sort of little girl who preferred sketching on the front porch to running wild with the neighborhood kids. Her favorite companion was a porcelain doll she'd named Lila, a gift from her father on her 8th birthday. To anyone else, it was just a doll, delicate and old-fashioned. But to Catherine, it was a world unto itself, the keeper of her secrets, her dreams, and the make-believe life she built when real life felt too confusing to understand. She lived with her parents, Anthony and Rosa Denino, in a modest home just off Hartford's main road. Anthony was a carpenter, hard-working, reserved, the kind of man who showed love through fixing things. Rosa was warm and deeply protective, often seen standing by the window at dusk, waiting for Catherine to come home from school. Together, they lived a simple, honest life, the kind that makes you think tragedy couldn't possibly find its way. Catherine was bright in school, not the top of her class, but thoughtful. Teachers described her as observant beyond her years, someone who noticed things others overlooked. There was something almost fragile about her, as though she understood the world could break, just like the porcelain skin of her beloved doll. Friends remembered her soft laugh and her curious habit of talking to her doll as though it could really hear her. "She used to say, 'Lila understands me,'" one classmate recalled years later. "Back then, we thought it was just a child's imagination. Now, it feels almost prophetic. It's those small details, her quiet habits, her innocence, her tenderness, that make what happened next so unthinkable. Because when Catherine vanished, it wasn't just a crime against one child. It was the shattering of something pure, something the entire town believed was unbreakable. It was Friday, November 13th, 1959, a date that would later be burned into Hartford's memory. The air carried that familiar bite of approaching winter, and the streets were lined with amber leaves that crunched beneath small feet. For the Denino family, it began like any other day. Catherine woke early, dressed herself in her favorite blue cardigan, and insisted on bringing Lila, the porcelain doll, to school for show and tell. Rosa hesitated. "Maybe leave her home today," she suggested gently. But Catherine only smiled, clutching the doll to her chest. "I'll be careful, Mama. I promise." By 8:15 a.m., she was out the door, her figure growing smaller with every step down the sidewalk. It was the last time her mother would ever see her alive. Catherine arrived at school just before the bell, attended her morning classes, and was seen at lunch sharing her sandwich with a friend, a quiet act of kindness that seemed ordinary at the time. Teachers later said she appeared distracted that day, glancing toward the classroom window as though something outside had caught her. Attention classes ended at 3 p.m., and children poured out onto the streets, laughing, running, chasing the last rays of daylight. Catherine was seen by at least 3 witnesses walking along Birchwood Lane around 3:20, carrying her doll. One elderly neighbor recalled hearing her humming softly, a tune that sounded like a lullaby. Then nothing. By 4 p.m., when she still hadn't come home, Rosa grew anxious. By 5, she was outside calling her name into the wind. When darkness settled and there was still no sign of Catherine, panic set in. Police were notified just after 6:30 p.m. Neighbors joined the search, flashlights cutting through the fog that rolled in from the nearby river. They combed fields, sheds, playgrounds, anywhere a child might wander. But it was as though Catherine had vanished into thin air. The only thing left behind was a single shoe, found near the old maple grove. A small, scuffed leather shoe, and beside it, a shard of porcelain, a piece of her doll. The search for Catherine Denino stretched into its second day. What began as a neighborhood effort soon grew into a full-scale operation. Police officers, firefighters, and volunteers sweeping the woods and riverbanks that framed the town. The local paper printed her school photograph on the front page under the headline, "10-year-old girl missing. Community joins hunt." By the third day, hope was thinning. Temperatures had dropped overnight, and frost coated the grass where searchers walked. Rosa refused to rest. She stood near the command post with Anthony at her side, both clinging to the fragile belief that Catherine might still be out there, cold and scared but alive. Then, on the morning of November 16th, a deputy spotted something pale beneath a cluster of fallen leaves near the edge of Willow Creek, an area that had already been searched once before. He brushed the leaves aside, and there she was, Catherine. Her small frame was lying partially covered by earth and debris, her blue cardigan still buttoned. Her porcelain doll, Lila, was beside her, shattered. One half of its face was missing. The deputy called for backup, his voice trembling on the radio. Within minutes, the quiet woods were flooded with flashing lights. The coroner would later note that Catherine's injuries suggested a violent struggle. There were signs of blunt trauma, defensive wounds, and most chillingly, the words "he broke my doll" scratched faintly into the dirt near her body. Whether those words were written by Catherine herself or by someone else has never been confirmed. When the news reached her parents, Anthony collapsed to the floor. Rosa's cries echoed through the street, a sound so raw that even hardened officers turned away. The entire neighborhood fell silent that evening. Shops closed early, television stayed off, and children were kept indoors. It wasn't just grief that hung over Hartford now. It was fear, because for the first time, people began to wonder, if a little girl could be taken and killed so close to home, what kind of monster was living among them? The discovery of Catherine Denino's body transformed a desperate search into a full-scale homicide investigation. Hartford police quickly cordoned off the area near Willow Creek, collecting soil samples, fibers, and the fragments of Catherine's shattered doll. Detectives described the scene as eerily deliberate, as though whoever placed her there wanted her to be found, but not too soon. Early reports indicated no clear signs of abduction from her route home. There were no tire tracks, no witnesses who saw her forced into a car. For investigators, that meant one thing: her killer likely knew her. Someone she trusted enough to stop and talk to, Chief Investigator Thomas Halal led the case, a seasoned detective with 20 years on the force. In a press briefing 2 days later, he told reporters, "This is not a random act. We're looking at someone from within this community." It was a statement that sent ripples of unease through every home in Hartford. Forensics at the time were limited, but what they did find painted a chilling picture. Tiny fibers matching a man's wool coat were recovered from Catherine's clothing. There were also traces of cigarette ash near her body, a brand favored by adults, not something a child would have handled. And then there was Lila, the doll. Experts noted the break in its porcelain face wasn't caused by a simple fall. It had been struck, possibly during the assault. Officers interviewed dozens of townspeople, neighbors, teachers, even delivery drivers who had passed through the area that day. One name appeared more than once, a local handyman named Gerald Myers. He'd done repair work for several families on Birchwood Lane, including the Deninos. Witnesses described him as odd, quiet, and overly friendly with children, but in a town desperate for answers, suspicion alone wasn't enough. Myers denied involvement, claiming he'd been at a repair job across town. His alibi seemed solid, at least on paper. Still, investigators couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine's case wasn't random. The clues, the broken doll, the handwritten message, the careful placement of her body, felt personal. Almost like someone wanted to send a message. But what was that message trying to say? The investigation into Catherine Denino's murder soon took on a darker, more unsettling tone. Detectives had their prime suspect, Gerald Myers, the local handyman. But as they dug deeper, new and stranger details began to surface, each one adding another layer to the growing sense of unease. Neighbors recalled seeing Myers near Birchwood Lane on the afternoon Catherine vanished, though the times didn't always match up. One witness said he was fixing a fence just after 2 p.m. Another claimed they saw his truck parked by the old maple grove around 3:15, the same area where Catherine's shoe was later found. When police confronted him with the inconsistencies, Myers grew defensive. "I fix fences, not little girls' dolls," he allegedly told detectives. The statement, odd as it was, appeared almost rehearsed. A search of his workshop turned up several unsettling items: a box of porcelain fragments, a set of carving tools, and a child's ribbon stained with something reddish-brown. But the lab results were inconclusive. Without DNA technology, the evidence couldn't definitively tie him to the crime. Then came another twist. A woman from 2 streets over claimed to have seen Catherine speaking with an older woman the day she disappeared. Someone described as stern-looking, wearing a long gray coat. No one could identify her, and she was never seen again. For a moment, investigators wondered if the he in "He Broke My Doll" could have been a red herring, perhaps to shift attention away from someone else entirely. Even Catherine's doll became a point of obsession. Forensic analysts discovered faint fingerprints on the broken porcelain, too smudged to identify, but notably larger than a child's. Some officers speculated that the message found near her body was written not by the killer, but by Catherine herself, a final act of terror from a child realizing too late that someone she trusted had turned on her. But who that person was, and why they would harm her, remained a mystery, because in every direction investigators turned, they found the same thing: a wall of silence, and behind it, the chilling suspicion that the truth might be closer than anyone dared to admit. The story of Catherine Denino's murder spread like wildfire, first through the small-town papers, then far beyond. Within days of her funeral, reporters from New York and Chicago descended upon the quiet community of Birchwood, each hoping to uncover the truth behind the doll. What had once been a private tragedy became a national fascination. A headline that wouldn't fade. The Birchwood Gazette ran the first sensational headline: "He broke my doll," the words that shook a town. The story described Catherine's final message in almost poetic terms, complete with eerie speculation about who he might be. Other papers followed suit, each version more dramatic than the last. Soon, Catherine wasn't just a little girl. She was the face of a haunting case in the news. Radio programs picked up the story, retelling it as a grim morality tale about innocence lost and evil hiding in plain sight. Listeners debated whether the killer was a neighbor, a drifter, or perhaps someone within the Denino family itself. Theories spread faster than facts, and before long, rumors became indistinguishable from the truth. For the Denino family, the attention was unbearable. Catherine's mother, who had rarely spoken publicly, begged for privacy, but her plea only fueled more speculation. Some reporters even trespassed onto their property, hoping for a photograph or a glimpse of the doll's remains. Meanwhile, the police found their work increasingly complicated. Tips poured in from across the country, many well-meaning, most useless. But the public had already made up its mind. Someone in Birchwood had done it. And until that person was caught, the town would never sleep easy again, even years later. Journalists would revisit the story, labeling it one of the most haunting true crime cases ever covered by the media. And with every retelling, one line remained constant: "He broke my doll." A sentence that once belonged to a frightened little girl, now echoing through time, and headlines and whispers alike. As the investigation dragged on, the once loud town of Birchwood began to fall silent. For months, detectives had followed every whisper, every lead, but nothing seemed to stick. The suspect list grew shorter, not because anyone had been cleared, but because evidence simply refused to cooperate. There was one man who stood at the center of speculation: Louis Harland, a quiet carpenter who had worked near the Denino home. His behavior after the murder raised eyebrows. He left town for several weeks, avoided questioning, and was reportedly seen burning items behind his workshop. When police finally tracked him down, his explanations were vague. He claimed he'd been overwhelmed by the accusations, but his alibi couldn't be fully verified. The district attorney tried to build a case around circumstantial evidence, traces of soil matching the creek bed where Catherine's belongings were found, and witness statements placing Harland near the area that night. But the physical evidence was too thin, and the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision. After a short, tense trial, Louis Harland was acquitted, and just like that, the story that once dominated national headlines began to fade from the front page. Years passed. The Denino family moved away. The creek where Catherine's doll was found grew over with reeds and wildflowers. But the sense of injustice never truly left Birchwood. Even now, some locals insist the killer still lives among them. An old man who avoids eye contact, or perhaps a newcomer who knows too much. Officially, the case remains unsolved. The files sit in a dusty cabinet at the county sheriff's office, marked cold case, unresolved. But for those who remember Catherine Denino, her laughter, her innocence, her final words, it never really went cold. It just went quiet. Decades have passed since that dark winter when Catherine Denino's story first gripped the quiet town of Birchwood. The headlines have long faded. The courthouse files have gathered dust. Yet the memory of the little girl who whispered, "He broke my doll," still lingers in local conversations and late-night recollections. Every few years, someone claims to have found something new, a piece of jewelry in the woods, a forgotten letter tucked inside an attic trunk, a faded photograph of a child who looks eerily like Catherine. Each time, hope flickers briefly, only to dim again when the evidence turns out to be nothing more than coincidence. Some investigators believe the real killer was never even questioned. They point to the inconsistencies in early police work, the lost evidence logs, the missing tape recordings, and the reliance on eyewitness accounts that changed over time. Others insist Louis Harland knew more than he ever revealed. But without forensic advances or preserved samples, even modern DNA technology offers little help now. Still, the case has not been entirely forgotten. Online forums, true crime enthusiasts, and amateur sleuths have kept the discussion alive, dissecting every available detail, hoping that one overlooked clue might finally lead to justice. But the truth remains elusive, just out of reach, like the faint echo of Catherine's laughter in the wind. And perhaps that's the most haunting part of it all. Not just the tragedy of a young life cut short, but the silence that followed, the unanswered questions, the half-remembered confessions, the lingering fear that somewhere, someone still knows the truth. Even now, when night falls over Birchwood and the wind moves through the trees, some locals swear they hear it, the soft, childlike voice saying, "He broke my doll." And so, even after all these years, Catherine Denino's story remains one of the most haunting true crime mysteries of our time, a quiet tragedy that continues to echo through the decades. Her case isn't just about what happened to one child, but about how innocence can vanish in an instant, and how silence can bury the truth for generations. Some say that remembering these stories is the only way to keep them alive, to give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Catherine's name may have faded from the headlines, but her memory deserves to be more than a file in a forgotten drawer. If this story moved you, or if you believe that no victim should ever be forgotten, consider subscribing to help keep these haunting stories alive. Every share, every comment, every moment spent remembering, it matters more than you think, because sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from remembrance.